but it doesn't always actually define what we mean by impacts. So I've suggested a definition here. When we're talking about impacts, particularly in relation to programme evaluations, talking about the direct effect of initiative or programme on those who participated in it, which is usually teaching staff, support staff, but it also includes the indirect effects on other individuals, which are typically pupils, although sometimes pupils are very much at the centre of these school improvement programmes. Okay, impacts at 3 levels. What we found in the work that we've been doing at NFL is to make this process of actually trying to capture and evaluate impacts relating from school improvement work, is to break it down into 3 levels. So to think about impacts on staff, and here we're often looking at things like impacts on subject knowledge and understanding, impacts on pedagogy and leadership, because those are often the 2 strands connected with school improvement programmes, focusing on in-classroom practice, but also often there's a management or leadership level as well, so there are 2 strands that we often focus on. Impacts on the whole school. Some programmes are obviously focused on specific departments or aspects of school provision that need to be improved, but often there's a whole school focus, or certainly wish that the benefits will benefit staff more widely. So here we're often looking at quality of teaching more widely, including variation in the quality of teaching across the school. We're looking at leadership both at the middle and senior level, and we're looking at impacts on ethos and culture of the school. And then there are also impacts on pupils. And it's almost a staged process, this. You're often looking at impacts on staff, percolate out onto whole school benefits before you start to get to a position where it actually becomes possible to detect impacts on pupils, certainly across the school. And here we're looking at measures like progress and attainment, confidence, motivation and engagement, and in some cases behaviour as well. Possible sources of evidence. I think one of the challenges here, and we've done a lot of consultation work with schools over the years, and schools have and teachers have varying views on all of this. At one side of the spectrum there are people who schools who are doing a lot of excellent work in this area, collecting a lot of evidence. They realise it's important, and they've got measures and processes in to support this kind of activity. But at the other end of the spectrum there are teachers, I think from my experience, who feel that it can't be done, particularly when we're talking about trying to capture impacts on pupils, and certainly from my experience of working in a professional research organisation, this is hard to do, but that's not to say it's not worthwhile or worth trying. And I think with preparation is the key for our work. Actually some valuable evidence can be collected. So when thinking about the sorts of evidence you collect to demonstrate these sorts of impacts, I'd always start by thinking about what evidence is most readily available already before you start having to do additional work, which is obviously time consuming and hard to fit in alongside all the other work we've got to do. So I'm talking about things like feedback from colleagues, line managers, grading and or feedback from lesson observation, changes to schemes of work, lesson plans, assessment methods. It's actually very useful when for evaluation to keep track of these things. When you make a change, make a note of it, keep a log. Allow yourself some time to go back and revisit and ask yourself, what difference has this actually made? Have we observed any difference in the classroom? And then you've got things like progress and attainment data, which are often seen as the gold standard, I suppose, in terms of evidence sources for improvement work in schools, and they can be the most difficult to establish, and certainly in terms of some sort of causal relationship between an interventional change you're making in your school practice, and then being able to attribute that to outcomes on pupils. And then there's additional research or action research that you may be undertaking as well, including both survey and interview data. And you might want to think about collecting feedback from parents and carers, particularly if it's a programme or initiative that involves them in some way. And then there also has the intervention or changes being introduced led to changes in terms of school policies or documentation. So has it been written into policy to be carried to have a wider impact across more than one teacher's classroom or department? So there's just a range of the sources available, and I think it's possible. I think one of the things I would emphasise is it's not all about pupil data. Okay, there are softer forms of evidence, perception data, more qualitative sources of information that are important and valid to collect. And you shouldn't think that just if that's the only data you've got, it's not worthwhile. It is. But if you can triangulate your data sources, that's when you really get more strength and power in terms of your interpretations. So further sources of help. So in terms of the work we've been doing in Wales, we pulled together what we grandly call the NFER toolkit, which is sort of a three-point source of help. The first two involve using existing toolkits. So we suggested that schools look at the Sutton Trust EF Teaching and Learning Toolkit and the DIY Evaluation Guide, also produced by the Education Endowment Foundation. How familiar are you with those first two sources? Is anyone using them? Got a few nods. You're all very quiet at the moment. This just makes sense. And for those who have used it, what are your views on those first two sources in particular? I mean, I've got some hard copies here, and so for example, here it can be downloaded as a hard copy, a PDF version. This is the Sutton Trust EF Teaching and Learning Toolkit, which is regularly updated. This is February 2014 was the last version I saw, and it's more accessible when you look at it on the screen. But this is the toolkit where basically evidence base sits behind these judgments about what sort of interventions in the school are having the most effect, and it's presented in terms of cost. And level of impact, which in terms of the EF toolkit, in terms of additional months' progress that are made, and sat behind this are a number of research studies which you can then link to and read more about. That's the first toolkit I've mentioned there. Sorry.
Is this the one that's meant to be updated and interactive?
Yes, the first one. Yeah.
You mentioned something.
Yes, that's right. Well, it's available. I've printed off as a hard copy here, which is something you can print off and take away and read. But I think primarily, and I don't work for EFF, and I know we have people here today who can give you more details about it, but it's primarily a website that you can go to and visit, and it's quite easy to navigate online, perhaps more easier than it is on the hard copy. And it is regularly updated.
Is there a case to say that some of the things that that toolkit recommends are context specific? To some extent, because it's a national programme and a national toolkit, it ignores the specific context of the schools.
Well, I mean, I can talk from an observer of it. I've not been involved in the development of it, although I should say NFER are involved in some randomised controlled trials that will feed into the existing and additional data that will go into the website. I mean, EFF took their funding from pupil premium, sort of top-side pupil premium funding, so there is a focus on working with disadvantaged young people. Having said that, or young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, having said that, I think many of the trials and initiatives that are currently being tested can have much greater of relevance to a wider group of young people and schools, so I don't think it's confined to that.
There are contexts such as coastal poverty and urban poverty are very different.
Sure.
Rural poverty is very different again.
Sure.
I mean, is that taken into account?
Yeah, I think that's a valid query about in terms of the relevance of it. I mean, it's designed as a way, I suppose, of communicating what can be quite dense research, evidence, reports into a way that's accessible, into an accessible research digest summary. But in doing that, I suppose you do lose some of the detail. Although saying that, sat behind these very short and accessible research summaries you can get drilled down to the full research reports if you want them, so the detail will be there. The second guide, the DIY Evaluation Guide, is another document which I think is only available as a hard copy, which looks like this. So I've only got a hard copy here. Both of these documents are freely available. If you Google them, you'll find them. And this is quite a detailed, I think, sort of handbook to how to do research in schools. So you might find this useful. I mean, I would say this is, if schools were doing half of the things in here, I think they're doing absolutely fantastic work. My experience is actually, we probably need to start at an earlier stage in here, because this almost encouraging schools to be doing things with RCTs, with comparison groups and that sort of thing. You know, quite detailed and intensive research, and I think actually you can be doing things that are less intensive and still getting some benefit and merit from that work. So I don't think you should feel that if you can't do something that's in this handbook isn't worthwhile, because I think it is. But what we're doing, those first two toolkits serve as a good introduction, I think, to both what's possible in terms of running your own research in schools, but also looking at what the existing evidence base says makes a difference to outcomes for pupils. Okay, so with those two pieces of information in hand, I think you're then able to start saying, okay, what do we need as a school? What are our targets? What can we be doing? What can we learn from what's already been done, and plan your intervention around that. So that's how we planned our toolkit, was that schools in Wales would familiarise themselves first of all with these two documents before they started planning an intervention programme, which they'd be doing in partnership with their schools through the Lead Emerging Practitioner School programme. So having assumed that schools have looked at those two documents, this is where our own toolkit comes in. And we were tasked with producing a light touch, I suppose, tool that wouldn't be time intensive to complete, but at the same time would provide some meaningful data and would actually would be useful. Okay, we don't want schools just to be completing these things for the sake of it. It's got to be of benefit to the schools for them to give the time to look at this and engage in this process. So there's a specific tool which I'll show you in a moment, but also on our own website. I know everyone's sort of plugging all their own resources throughout the day, but do have a look on the NFER website. I think if you'd looked a few years ago, you'd have found it quite difficult to actually get anything worthwhile out of it in terms of finding research studies that are written in a way that's accessible for you, but it has been overhauled over the last few years, and we do have dedicated pages for schools, and we also have a number of free resources on there about how to do research in schools, and they're also there's a new how-to series, how-to guide, how to do research. I've got some which are available for a small cost. It's about £4. I've got some flyers at the front if you want to have a look at that. I haven't been involved in that, but it has drawn on research experience actually doing this work, and we've developed toolkits for schools around that. So I think you'll find that information helpful. Any questions on any of that? How much? One of the things I'm interested in is to what extent are those, particularly those first two toolkits, is that news to you? Were you previously aware that these resources existed? Yeah, so there's awareness, and I thought going from awareness to actually then using it. Are you looking at them? Are you encouraged to look at them? Is there discussion in the schools about them?
I think I'd heard of number one just through Twitter, but not actually really looked at it. And number two, I know I linked to the same organisation, but I hadn't heard of that at all.
Okay. Okay. Well, certainly, I would recommend looking at them as a useful starting point. I mean, there's a myriad of resources out there, and it's very confusing to know where to go to pick up some sensible help and advice about how to do research in schools. But those two documents, I think, would be, from sound organisation, would be a good starting point. Okay, right. I'm going to flip to showing you the toolkit we've developed. I might have to come around here first, I think. Close this down. Okay, so this thing we've very grandly called the NFER toolkit. Is essentially an Excel file. Okay. The idea, I'm going to have to crouch down here to show you it. I think the idea was that we wanted it to be standalone, so we spent some time, we visited schools involved in tranche one of this improvement programme, and we discussed and introduced the toolkit, but the idea was it was a standalone